Welcome to Kaiser Caliber History. In today's video, we're going to be looking at 10 military leaders from the First World War and examine briefly what they did in the war, as well as some other key facts about them. If you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing or leaving a like in the video, and let's just jump right into it. Douglas Haig was the leader of the British Expeditionary Force from late 1915 to 1919. He oversaw many of the largest battles of the war for the BEF, including the Somme and Passchendaele. His legacy is hotly contested amongst historians today. Many perceive him as a callous stereotype of the World War I general who cared little for his men and wasted countless lives. Others believe this perception of him is unwarranted, and he was simply learning on the job like every other leader of World War I. However, one thing that can't be denied is that his most famous nickname that stuck with him to this very day is in fact Butcher Haig. John J. Pershing, a distinguished American military man who made a name for himself during the Spanish-American War. Pershing was appointed commander of the American Expeditionary Force during World War I in 1917. He was tasked with turning 2 million inexperienced American men into a fighting force to stand against the battle-hardened Germans. After heavy American losses in their first battles of the war, Pershing learned and adjusted quickly. He led the AEF in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, helping the Allies to force Germany into an armistice in 1918. Philippe Pétain is disavowed and reviled in modern France for his role in World War II, but there was a time when he was one of the most beloved heroes in the country. This was due to his actions during World War I, more specifically, during the infamous Battle of Verdun. In the, quote, furnace that was Verdun, Pétain distinguished himself as a leader by halting the German advance, holding the city, and declaring a hardline stance that Verdun would be defended at all costs. This earned him the nickname, the Lion of Verdun. His World War I performance was so distinguished that after he was sentenced to death in his post-World War II trial, Charles de Gaulle lessened his sentence to life imprisonment due to his service during the Great War. Erich Ludendorff is best known for being one of many German World War I heroes that got themselves mixed up with Hitler and the Nazi Party during the interwar years. Due to this association, he's uniquely one of the only World War I figures that receives popular portrayals in World War I set media as a villain. For example, his main role as a villain in the 2017 movie Wonder Woman. His rise to fame in the Great War was due in part to the role he played in the famous German victory over the Russians in the Battle of Tannenberg in the early years of the war. In the later years of the war, his reputation and rising status became synonymous with that of the Chief of the General Staff, Paul von Hindenburg. He served as Hindenburg's deputy and was responsible for many of the tactics behind Hindenburg's plans and many of the successes the German army had during the war. Ferdinand Foch, known as one of the most inspired generals on the Western Front during the First World War, Foch wasn't always destined for victory and heroism. His various escapades during 1915 and 1916 would give him a reputation of being too inspired for his own good. During this time, he was careless with the lives of his men and was overzealous in his offensives. However, in the final years of the war, after becoming Supreme Allied Commander in March of 1918, he oversaw the Allied withstanding of the Ludendorff offensive and the victory at the Second Battle of Marne. His achievements in the final year of the war would be those that defined his legacy. John French was a top military commander coming into World War I, having distinguished himself as a cavalry officer in the Boer War. He was appointed to commander of the BEF in 1914 during the outbreak of war. His tactics, being willfully unfit for modern warfare, and his vulnerability under pressure, led him to be very ineffective. In a war where technology changed at a rapid pace, and where nothing in previous experience would have prepared him for what he would face, he found himself in over his head and unable to adapt. He eventually resigned his position in late 1915. Joseph Joffre, Chief of the Army Staff of France at the start of World War I until 1916. Joffre was most well known for the French victory at the Marne. After this victory, he became a hero in France for being the first French general to lead a victory over a German army in over a century. This, however, led to him retaining this position for much longer than he should have, as his tactics were outdated for modern warfare. Under Joffre's command, the French achieved very little success in the early war other than the victory at the Marne. Joffre was most famous for his unrelenting ability to remain calm in any situation, even when things appeared to be falling apart. Erich von Falkenhayn became Chief of the General Staff in September of 1914, taking over for Helmuth von Moltke the Younger. Contrary to most German thinking at the time, he believed that the war could not be won against Russia, and believed that winning in France was an absolute necessity. Thus, he concentrated troops and resources heavily on the Western Front. The German offensive at Verdun was his principal plan of attack. He believed that he could wear down the French, and once breaking through and conquering Verdun, march on to victory in the rest of France. After this plan failed, Falkenhayn was replaced in his role by Paul von Hindenburg, and he spent the rest of the war commanding various forces in Romania, Palestine, and Lithuania. Robert-Nivelle is most well known for his successes at Verdun after he succeeded Philippe Pétain as commander of the Second Army there. Nivelle was actually the one who uttered the famous quote, "They shall not pass," at Verdun, a quote which is very often incorrectly attributed to Pétain. The French were so impressed with his performance at Verdun that they made him the successor to Joffre as the commander and chief of the French armies. Sticking to what led him to success at Verdun, he decided that the tactics he used there could be used everywhere to win the war. He was wrong, and after the French took 120,000 casualties under his command in 1917, mutinies began in the French armies, and he was quickly replaced by Pétain. Mustafa Kemal, who would later become known as Atatürk, was the founder of the modern-day state of Turkey, which he helped birth out of the ashes of the Ottoman Empire. However, the notoriety and merit he leaned on to make this possible came from his time as a military leader during World War I. He was the man who led the Ottoman forces to victory in the nearly year-long Gallipoli campaign over the British and French forces, thus helping to prevent the fall of Istanbul. After this massive success, he was promoted to brigadier general and spent the rest of the war fighting in eastern Turkey, Syria, and Palestine. He also was noted as one of the few members of the Ottoman military leadership at the time who was not a perpetrator of the infamous Armenian genocide. And there you have it. There are 10 very famous World War I military leaders. Let me know what your favorite is down in the comments below, and why. If you like this video again, please consider leaving a like or subscribe to my channel. There'll be plenty more content like this. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something and enjoyed it. This is Kaiser Caliber History.